In this episode, I talk about emotional difficulties and trauma. Please do not listen if you believe any of these subjects may trigger you. The content of this episode is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. As always, seek guidance from your health care professional. This is the Living in Mid-Bloom podcast, lighthearted and heartfelt conversations about what it looks like to live, heal, and blossom in middle age. I'm your host, April Pruitt. Let's get our bloom on. Hi, mid-bloomers. I hope everyone is well and still wishing everyone a happy new year. We're still in January. Today's interview is with Elizabeth Reynolds O'Brien. She is an author, a ghostwriter, and is a freelance author as well, and writes on different subjects, including psychology. And I call her Lizzie. She lives in England. Lizzie and I both struggle with dissociative, what they say, disorders, though we both aren't crazy about that term. I've been diagnosed with dissociative amnesia, and Lizzie has been diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. And it's changed, I know, for her through the years, different alters that have basically kept her alive. We both experienced terrible trauma in our childhoods, and this is a way that we have survived. So here is part one of our discussion. We talk about different kind of mental issues, call it a disorder or whatever. And instead of that, she suggested that we use the term response, because it's not like this, there's something wrong with us. This is something happened to us, and here is our response to it.
Yes.
Whether it is DID or, in my case, dissociative amnesia, whatever it is, it's a response to what happened. And I like that term.
Yes. And I remember many years ago now, when I was doing my master's degree, we had a woman professor come in to talk about post-traumatic stress disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know it at the time, but I actually have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD, as well as the DID. Apparently the two are very closely linked. And this lecturer was part of a committee who wanted to get the term disorder at the end changed to something else, because she felt that if you go through that kind of situation that she was working with, such as refugees, human trafficking, these kind of things, she said it would be very strange to not have a reaction. She said it's a defense mechanism.
Yes.
Has
a
been
survival mechanism.
Yeah, exactly. And she said she had worked with refugees and people that had to relocate across multiple continents due to war. And she said, and that, some of them had seen absolutely horrendous things. And she said, I don't think disorder should be on the end, because if you think about the symptoms of traditional PTSD, it's hypervigilance, it's fight or flight, these kind of things, they're all there to protect you.
Right. Even
though at the moment in time when you are experiencing it, it may not feel like it. You may be like, well, why is this happening to me? I don't understand. But she was very big on saying, I don't think it's a disorder. I think it's an adaptation, was the word she used.
Yes.
And I didn't realize it at the time, but that really struck a chord with me. And I went home and I thought about it for a very, very long time. Because I thought, actually, I think she's onto something there. Yeah.
Absolutely. I've had moments, and I've mentioned it in my previous episodes of my podcast last year. I had a TIA, it was a mini stroke, they call it.
Oh, gosh.
And while I was in the emergency, and I was aware of what I was doing, but I had asked them to bring the doctor to me. I couldn't stop crying. I'm just looking in his eyes and I'm talking to him, and I was just scared. And a good friend of mine who's also a therapist, we talked about it afterward and we talked about it on the show. But it was like I felt like I was like 10 years old.
Yeah.
Again, I was very aware, but I felt like I was just a little kid and I needed him to hold my hand.
Okay.
And I struggled putting it all together, but she kind of kept urging me to walk through that whole process. And I was grateful for that. It helps to have some people in your life that can at least, support you. I'm hoping that that's some of your experience. What I do want to start talking about is, I guess, when you realized that there's something different about you, or maybe the way you were looking at the world, or how this
Um,
came to be.
I've been thinking about that for the last couple of days I guess, in preparation. I remember thinking, yeah, must have been when I met my husband. So I was about 19 years old.
And please know if there's anything that you don't want to touch upon or something I mentioned, you understand that
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
here to protect you.
No,
Okay.
that's fine. And I'd left high school. I met him at college, and yeah, so I was about 18, 19 years old. And I remember that was a time when there was very active socialization. Everybody was having 18th birthday parties, like all the time, because everybody you knew was turning 18.
Right.
But everybody was doing these huge house parties. I remember attending some of the parties. And then there was one time I went back into college on a Monday morning, and this mutual friend me and my husband, my boyfriend then had, came up to me and she said, "Oh, you were so much fun at the party on Saturday." I said, "What party on Saturday? I didn't go to a party on
Oh my
Saturday."
gosh.
And she said, "Yeah, you did. You came to the party at, I think it was her boyfriend's house." And she said, "You were so much," and I was just,
Oh my
"Excuse me?
gosh.
Excuse me? I don't." And I went to Paul, my husband, and I said, was I there? What, is she lying? Was I drunk?" He said, "No, you weren't drunk." And I said, "Okay," because I'd never had such an obvious
Mm.
instance where somebody said to me, "You did this."
Right.
And I was
Right.
like, "No, I didn't." But
Wow.
I chalked it up and I said, okay, it could be I was drunk, maybe I
Right.
was drinking, my husband didn't notice, boyfriend at the time didn't notice, maybe it's but
Right.
what I noticed was things kept happening like that. So my husband would call me on the phone and be like, "Are you still mad at me?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about? I'm not mad at you." And he was like, "Well, you were, because you were
Oh my
screaming
gosh.
at me yesterday." I was like, "What are you talking about?" So things kept happening around me, not
Yeah.
to me, around
Right.
me.
Right.
And I thought, this is odd, right? I was like, that's not normal. That doesn't seem to fit with what everybody else is experiencing. But I chalked it up to a whole ton of misunderstandings, because
Well,
yeah,
if you come to the real conclusion, it's like that's the last thing you're going to think of. That it's like,
exactly.
well, that's just not real,
That's nothing. My husband had said to me that there were many times I don't recall,
Hmm.
when things about used to be called multiple personality disorder or
Right.
dissociative identity disorder. He said it would come up in a film, not in a news article, because it's not really in the news that much, but
Hmm.
it would come up in a movie, and he said, and you would always just click it off. And
Oh.
I said, "I do not remember doing these things," and he said, we think we know who it is that was doing that.
Mm.
But just the notion of this being there was enough to make one of my guys come out and go, "No, we're not doing that.
We're not
I'm turning
looking at
that off.
that.
We're not
Yeah.
looking at that. We're not even thinking about that," because they did not want me to find out that they were there, because that would mean uncovering all of
Right.
it and why they
Right.
were
They're still
there.
protecting you. And
Yes.
also, I don't know how the whole process works, but the protection of you, but
Mm.
also then maybe their destruction.
Yes. I remember thinking, I felt very confused a lot of the time because
Mm.
people were saying to me, but don't you remember this? No. And I just thought, maybe I've just got a really bad memory. Like, really,
Yeah,
really bad. Like, I've got the worst memory. But then I was like, but I can't have a really bad memory because it didn't fit. I could remember certain things. And I thought, but I don't have a bad memory. I'm just doing things I don't remember.
right, right.
And I thought, well, everybody does that. And this is the thing, it's the rationalizing, which so many people that I've met or spoken to that have DID and other dissociative disorders seem to do. They just rationalize it away. Oh, well, I was tired, or I can't remember everything, can I? And even in
Right.
the TV show The Crowded Room, the actor host, the main guy, Danny, said, do you
Yeah,
remember everything you've ever done? And it's such a good logical defense, isn't it? Because nobody remembers everything
right.
they've done.
Exactly,
So,
exactly.
so I just thought, I remember thinking for a long time, oh, I've just got a really bad memory.
It's interesting you say that because I know through the years I would have, a family member mention something to me, and I'm like, then I think, is she gaslighting me? Because I don't remember that
Yes,
happening. And it
yes.
wasn't just, it sounds similar to you in that it wasn't just like you were being protected from negative stuff. There's also good things happening that
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember, or maybe
Yes.
I was doing something for work that was real positive, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't remember it because maybe I was fearful of
Mm-hmm.
doing it. It went well, but I don't have a memory of what happened.
Yes. And there was a particularly big one. You were talking about family there.
Hmm.
When he was then my fiance by that time, but he met my oldest sister,
Okay.
and we had to travel across the country for this trip because my sister didn't live around the corner. She doesn't live too far from us now, but at that point we were living outside London. So we had
Okay.
to travel for 2 hours. That's not an insignificant thing. And then we stayed over the weekend and then came home. And I remember a few years later, I said to my husband, "Oh, and you'll get to meet my sister for the first." And he, "But I've met your sister. What are you talking about?" And I thought that's such a big thing. You
Yeah.
don't just brush that under the rug. It's not like going to the corner shop. And
Right.
I remember feeling somewhat frozen in place and being like, "But I don't remember that." And I felt like, and I did the whole, "Oh, you're joking, you haven't met her." And he said, "Yes, I have. And she's got red hair, like, me,
Yeah.
got red hair. She's bubbly. She's got a little Staffordshire Bull Terrier. I've met her." I said, "Kind of, because I wasn't there." He said, "You were there." And it kind of went back and forth like this for a while. And I was just like, okay, fine, whatever. And he had an idea what was going on quite early on, bless him. And he was kind of like, "Don't you see how that's a little bit strange that you don't remember?" I was like,
Did it scare you at all? Or what were your
terrifying. It was terrifying. It did scare me. And I then became concerned about epilepsy because one of my siblings, who has now passed away quite a long time
Mm.
ago, he had epilepsy and he would forget things. So then I was like, do I have epilepsy? Because such massive gaps in memory can be explained away by petit mal seizures or absence
Mm.
seizures.
Mhm.
So I went
Mhm.
through a whole barrage of tests, which
Oh
the
my
doctors were like,
gosh.
yeah, the doctors were like, "There's a history of epilepsy here. We should look into this." Nothing. Nothing came up. Nothing came out. They were like, "Nope, you're fine." And I was like, "So I just find the memory gaps and all this?" And they was like, "Oh, well," they didn't have an answer because they
Yeah,
were neurologists, not psychiatrists.
right,
And I just kind of went, "Okay, well, good news. I don't have epilepsy,
right,
but what do I have?" Because
right.
it's raised more questions than it's answered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, terrifying, absolutely terrifying. But you learn to go with it. I know that sounds really weird. You just kind of go, well, whatever.
But
Don't
yes, of course, because what else is there?
Exactly.
Especially if they or whoever it is still protecting you are not ready to look at that.
They're quite eager. They were very eager for me not to be sniffing around in that area.
Yeah.
And so if I would kind of go, it could be anything, you could, I think they were almost like, oh, thank God she's not doing it. It's fine. She's not digging. It's fine. She's not digging. And when I started psychotherapy in 2022 and the digging started, one of them came out. I was furious. She was furious. She's digging and she's going to find it all out. And we've expletives everywhere. I don't swear very much, but expletives being thrown left, right, and centre here by this particular alter who was not happy because we're digging now. And she's like, no, everything's going to get found out and we've all failed and it's stop digging was kind of the message.
Well, and what's going to happen when she finds out? How is she going to be?
Exactly.
Why did you decide to start? Was that the first time you were doing therapy? Or through the years, were you going through any therapy?
I've been through therapy a lot in my life. The first time it was for misdiagnosed depression. And it was helpful. I'm not gonna lie. It was helpful. It was with a charity and I got so many sessions and it was with a counsellor, not a psychotherapist. But it was helpful to just have somebody to talk to. I was going through my degree at the time, loads of stress. I was planning a wedding, loads of stress. So it was just nice to go into a room and just be like, oh, lovely, right. Here's what's happening.
Right.
Then I went to see a psychotherapist some years later. 2 sessions in, this woman said to me, I don't think you have depression. And I said, okay, what do you think it is? And she said, I'm not going to tell you what I think it is. But she referred me to see a psychiatrist who then diagnosed me with complex PTSD. And then I was sent to more therapy, EMDR therapy, eye movement. I don't know what the DR stands for.
Yeah.
But it's the therapy where they wag their finger in front of your eyes and it helps you.
The eye move,
The eye movement. And that, again, that helped a bit.
Right. Yeah, you're just kind of like at the edges of it. And
poking it.
Right. We haven't cracked it open yet, but
no, not quite yet.
Well, let me ask you this before you go on is what were those symptoms of depression? And I'm curious why she didn't think it was depression. Was it you just feeling sad or no energy or?
I had immense apathy. I was very I was depressed, but it wasn't just depression. There was something else there, and I couldn't put a name on it.
Yeah.
And I had been diagnosed with depression when I was very, very young by a general practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd basically gone, yeah, you have depression, blah, 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 blah. So I'd gone to see her with the diagnosis that I had. She said to me that there was a session, only 2 sessions in, as I said, and she said, you turned up, and she said, and you were very combative for the first few minutes. She said, and then you kind of clicked back and you were like, oh, okay. And then you kept talking about something completely not related. And that was when she was looking and she was like, I don't think this is depression. She knew what it was, but she didn't want to say, I think you have this, dear, because she wasn't sure.
Right. That was smart because I can't imagine throwing that in your face when it's,
when you're not even remotely aware of it.
Right.
So she sent me to see a psychiatrist, complex PTSD diagnosis, and then EMDR therapy. And then we fast forward to 2021 when everything hit the proverbial fan, shall we say. I had a cancer scare, of all things.
Oh, my goodness.
And it was during that period where everything wasn't quite back to normal after 2020, and it was still quite hard to see a doctor. But I went in and I had a mole looked at on my chest. and they were worried. So they referred me. I had biopsied. But that set in a chain of events wherein my team were like, okay, now we've got this big thing potentially happening. She can't cope. I couldn't cope. It was hard. Potentially, real cancer scare. That's scary.
Very, yeah.
I was very scared. So then one of them came out and just decided, I'm gonna do this now. And I lost a lot of weight because this particular altar has an issue with eating. So I lost a ton of weight. I was, in the words of my husband, a nightmare. But he kind of had an idea what was going on.
Now, I got to say, though, that's a blessing, because if he just kind of thought, she's just a bitch and I'm done with it.
Yeah.
You were just being a difficult human being, as opposed to there's something more here.
Yeah.
And that he was willing to look at it. I think that's amazing.
He is honestly my angel, and I am beyond lucky to have him in my life. And I know that completely. Getting a bit teary. He's just been so supportive and so caring and so empathic to the whole thing. And I just know I am so, so blessed to have him in my life.
Yeah.
But interestingly, that's not a coincidence, and we'll come back to that. He was almost chosen, not by me.
Yeah.
So he basically said to me after this period of being difficult and starting arguments and everything, he said, look, you've got to go. I can't do this. This is a nightmare. You're not eating. You're not you're not well. You need to get help. And I agreed, just to, in between these things I didn't quite remember, I was like, yeah, I'll go, shut up, whatever. So I remember calling the therapist, and we had like an over the phone talk. And she said, oh, what's the problem? And I've actually got it written here: nightmares, flashbacks, hyperarousal. This is all very much the complex PTSD. And then I've written the word disassociation here. Fun, innit? And I've written feeling disconnected, nothing is real, time jumps, seems to follow triggers, extreme bouts of anger, and memory gaps.
Wow.
So I actually wrote it down for the phone call with the therapist. And she was like, yeah, you need to come see me soon. And I told her about the weight loss, and she was like, yeah, you need to come see me.
Wow.
I thought it was just the complex PTSD was getting worse. That first session, oh my gosh. My husband went with me because he was like, I'm kind of worried you're not going to go.
Yeah.
So I'm marching you in to see this woman.
Well, this is serious. And I've had my run of bad therapists. So I think it's also good to have somebody else there as a witness, especially if you're in another altar. So
I completely agree. It's important, because if you're in a very vulnerable state, you can't gauge somebody accurately.
Yeah.
And she was listed as a trauma therapist, but that doesn't necessarily mean that she's good. Do you know what I mean? It's like she could be terrible as a trauma therapist. And he said to me, I had to come with you because I wanted to make sure you were there, and I wanted to also check her out. You're absolutely right. He was very cautious about who got let into this. And that was smart of him. And during that first session, my therapist and I have reflected on it. She said 3 people walked into the room. She was sat there. She said 3 people walked in. It was you, it was your husband, and it was one of your alters. They were very much there, and she was not happy. She did not want to be there. She threw every comprehensible spanner into it to make it not happen. To swearing at the therapist during the first session, to shouting, yelling, and then I would kind of come back and be like, and this is what's happening, and I've had clothing go missing, I've had stuff be thrown away, I don't know what's happening. And then she would come back and go, yeah, and I'd effing do it. And it was like my therapist said there was 2 people there.
Wow.
It was one person. There was 2 people you were crying, you were very vulnerable, you were scared, and then this, well, I don't effing care, and I'm gonna, and Paul was just like, this
Oh
is
my
what it's
God.
like.
Yeah.
Help.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then she said the famous last words, as it was, which was, after everything had kind of calmed a bit, she looked at me and she was giving me the kind of the side eye a little bit, the kind of raised eyebrow and the kind of, and she said, have you ever heard of dissociative identity disorder? And I remember collapsing into the chair and saying, anything else?
Oh my gosh.
Anything else except that?
Oh,
Please.
oh, must have been terrifying.
It was a life-changing moment, for sure. One that I will never, ironically, never forget when she said those words to me. And I cried all the way home. I cried for days, crying, just crying and crying and crying. I felt so much shame. I felt, oh, that's it then. You know, all these
what
very
is wrong with me? Why is this?
why,
Yeah.
what has happened. And I also knew what it meant because I'd worked in mental health, I'd studied mental health. I knew what it meant. When we were studying the masters, there wasn't an excessive look, or even the degree, there wasn't an excessive look at the dissociative disorders, but I knew what it meant.
Yeah.
It meant trauma,
Yes.
big
Yes.
trauma somewhere
Yes.
way back. And I cried because I was like, I know what this means and this is going to hurt. And it hurt.
Yeah. That's a lot of things to start digging through.
Uh-huh.
And like you, I know that feeling of, ah, crap. This is it.
I know what it means. Yeah.
Were you ever recorded so that you could hear the other alters or?
That's interesting. My therapist never did because they didn't show up for therapy very often. My husband, actually quite recently, we've only been living in this house for 6 months. We haven't been here for
Okay.
very long. In the previous house, just before we moved, he was talking to one of my alters and he said, look, can I start filming you? And the alter was like, so it kind of filmed this alter talking, and I watched it back, and I still don't quite know how to process it. It's like it's me,
Right.
but it's not me, but it is, but it isn't, talking completely differently, different mannerisms,
Oh my
even the way
gosh.
this alter is sitting, the way this alter's holding the face is very different.
Wow.
And I actually put it in one of my articles on LinkedIn. I had a friend who lived with us say to me, it was the eeriest thing. It's like, it looked like you, but it wasn't you. He saw me during the switch, after a switch. And he said, it looked like you, but it didn't sound like you, didn't walk like you, didn't act like you. He's like it was wearing a mask. It just wasn't you in
Wow.
there.
It's amazing what the mind can do.
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
it's important to note that my system has got 5 ulcers. You have to count yourself as one of them because you're the host, and then
sure.
there's 4 others.
Okay.
And the ulcer that we're talking about here that was recorded and that my friend recalled seeing was a male ulcer. I only have
Okay.
2 males, 2 females.
Okay.
Male ulcer. So my friend Keith said to me, I didn't know your voice could go that deep. I have quite a deep voice, but he's like, this was
Wow.
way lower. And when I was watching that video about that my husband took, I was like, oh,
Yeah.
how am I doing that? That's
Yeah.
weird.
I can't imagine what that would be like. You watching yourself and you don't even recognize
No,
yourself.
no, it's
Wow.
not the first time it's happened. In a weird way, there was that same male altar and my husband during that period after the cancer scare. We joined an archery group, Robin Hood archery,
Yeah.
and it was I don't remember it. But there was a video taken by one of the members of the group of just people loosing their arrows.
Right.
And this was posted to Facebook. And Paul pointed and said, "Oh, look at you there." And I kind of went, "What are you talking? That's not me." Because this person was wearing a big hat. I have big hats, but I was like, why is this a big black hat? I was like, that's a guy. I could only see me from the back. I could only see because it was just like they were focusing mainly on the I can't remember what this pose is called, but there's different types of ways you.
Right.
But I could just see this person in a big black hat with black jeans, a black t-shirt. Couldn't see the face, and Paul's, "Oh, look at you there, you're doing so well." And I said, "That's not me.
Oh my God.
That's a guy." Paul said, "No, that's you." I was like, "No,
wow.
it isn't." So I've had it happen, but confusing.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, "That's not me," but it was me.
No, I'm curious that's the male, and the male is the first thing I thought of, just my own experiences. The male being protective, or
yes,
I'm sitting here and I think, or wanting to use it on whoever caused you the trauma. I still have a lot of rage in me, and I struggle with anger because most of my life people didn't want me to be angry. They just, I know that's a matter of control.
Yeah, of course it is.
But I still struggle with that.
Yeah.
Were you aware then of the trauma that you had gone through before you started, seeking help with your depression? I didn't know. I know you have at least one sibling that's living. Is that?
I'm part of a very big family. I'm the youngest. I had 7 older siblings, 3 sisters, 4 brothers.
Oh, wow.
2 of the brothers have passed away.
Oh, my
Both in
goodness.
2004.
Oh,
Bad
my
year.
goodness. I'm so
Bad year.
sorry.
It's a long time ago. It's still
Yeah.
raw in many ways, but it's quite a long time ago. I was aware of bits of the abuse because you can't really filter out everything.
Yeah.
So I was aware of little bits and pieces here and there because my father he's not dead, an alcoholic and very, very abusive to everybody in the family, but to the outside world, he could charm the birds from the trees. Everybody loved him. "Oh, you can't be talking about him. That's not what he's like." I'm thinking, excuse me, I live with him.
Right.
And I've had many therapists say to me that this is typical of a narcissist. One way in the home, different way outside, and they're trying to get their gang together of supporters who will cheer them and applaud them. But they have to take the mask off at some time. And he took his mask off in the house, and he was a nightmare. I remembered little bits and pieces like the shouting, the yelling, all of this. I didn't remember so much the physical or the sexual. I didn't remember the sexual at all. That had all been funneled into 2 of my guys.
Yes.
And the physical was also more funneled into that altar we were talking about, the one who was at the archery group with the big hat.
Absolutely. That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I remember reading somewhere, I'll have to check it, but defender altars across the spectrum tend to be male. And it's because there is an association with protection, masculinity. You think of, protection. I get lots of images pop into my mind, like the Terminator. They're all very
more physical strength.
Yeah, it's a masculine kind of ideology in many ways. And my dear friend, who also has DID, her defender altar is also male. And I've seen it many times, and I think the literature supports that. But that defender altar dealt with a lot of the physical abuse and not so much the verbal, not so much that. So it had all been funneled into different altars.
Right.
So that when there was a sign that, something bad's going to happen, this alter could spring out and go, okay, I'm doing this
Yeah.
now. I'll
Yeah.
take this.
Right.
So bits and pieces, but not as much as I have access to now.
Yeah.
Now that
Yeah.
we've started to talk, it's like, oh, okay. That's horrifying.
Yeah.
So,
Are
yeah.
there things that your alters are allowing you to remember or to learn?
Yes, there's quite a lot. My therapist had said to me that is all part of the healing that we were talking about earlier, which feels like you've been
Right.
run by a
Right.
truck.
Right.
They start to pass things across. And sometimes it can be quite benign things that you're like, oh, I remember that. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
remember that teddy that I used to have, or I remember. It's not all bad because they've kind of been
Right.
around for so long that
Right.
it's not,
Right.
it's not all awful, but the majority of it is. But you kind of go, oh, I remember that. And then it's like, oh, yeah, bang, here's another really nice one for you to remember. And you go, oh, Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
God. Right. Yeah. So quite a few new memories that have come to me in the last 2.5 years that I've gone into therapy about, I've wailed about, I've cried, I've had, I've written it down, I've spoken to my friend about it. I've spoken to my husband, and my husband said to me right at the beginning of this whole thing with the DID treatment, he said, I'm not going to tell you anything that your alters have told me because I don't want to influence this and I don't want to push this onto you. If you say to me, hey, sweetie, did one of them tell you this? He said, I'll say yes or no, and then we can talk about it. Pretty much every memory I've had come back, one of them has told him in the last 18 years. There have been a few that they haven't, but he's like, yeah, I knew about that. Yeah, I knew about that. Yeah, I knew about that. And that was what this alter told me or that alter told me. And I was like, okay,
Oh my
I'm the last to know.
God. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I
Yeah.
can't imagine that feeling. It's interesting because there are things that nothing's come back to me specifically, but I had to ask a relative. Things kept coming up. I was in
Mm.
therapy and I would have most of my life this terrible nightmare where
Yeah.
I am the abuser. And so
Oh,
I thought, oh my God, what is wrong with me? I'm sick because how could I tell anybody that that's what's happening, that
yeah.
I'm the abuser? And as I gained more trust with the therapist, they could share with me that that's usually the case when you're a victim.
Yeah.
So really, it was about 12 or 13 years ago that I was fully aware of the disassociation and why. I had hints of why. And, when it's from your household,
Yeah.
it seems like there's no other choice but to disassociate because that's supposed to be your safe place, right?
Exactly.
And it's not. It's
No.
not.
No.
Have you ever talked to any of your other siblings about it, or I wonder if any of them have used the same methods to protect themselves or
I had, I'm trying to think now. I did disclose this diagnosis to one of my sisters, and it didn't go well.
mm,
And she basically said something akin to, well, it wasn't that bad.
denial, boy.
Yeah. And my therapist had said to me that this particular sister is because there's quite a lot of age gaps in my family. My parents had me very late. And this particular sister is 17 years older than me.
Oh, okay.
So when this abuse started with me, I was about 5 or 6. So she would have been a young adult. And my therapist said maybe by just being like, it wasn't that bad, she's then avoiding potential blame on herself.
Mm,
And the kind of, I was at an age where I could have done something. I was an adult. I could have helped. But
right.
it wasn't that bad. And it was interesting because we were at her house and my husband was there and we were sat across from her and I had a water bottle that I was just kind of drinking from. And I told her, oh, I've been, and it was very hard. It's not the kind of thing
Of course.
you bring up in, general conversation. And I said to her, I've been diagnosed with DID. And she said, oh, that's multiple personality, right? And I said, yeah. Spoke about it for a little bit. And then she said, oh, well, that doesn't really add up because it wasn't that bad. And then Paul said it was such a moment of, okay, because one of my ulcers came out and threw the bottle of water at her and got up and stormed out of the house.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
And he said he was kind of clapping slightly, like, good for you. Because this was the first kind of, we're now disclosing this information to family, and that's
you're showing your heart. I mean, this is nothing could be more painful than that. And in the same household, you're hoping that there is some kind of understanding.
Yeah.
Or even verification.
Yeah.
Because I wondered for every now and then, it's like, did this really happen? Because I've had people say, oh, that couldn't have, that couldn't. It's like, how dare you discount, what I've gone through? Why in the world would anybody say something like that? I mean, I'm still protecting my abuser.
Yeah.
I'm still not quite sure why, because I love this person.
Of course.
And they're no longer with us. But it's just it's just a bunch of, I would like to use my really very, very bad words, but I won't.
Yeah. Yeah.
I won't.
I could sense that. It's like there's something happening. There's a cuss. It's like, don't say it. Don't say it. Yeah.
But I know when we were first talking, and I was telling you that I was thinking about getting in touch with, a narcissistic relative, and you were already shaking your head like, no.
Don't do it.
I was like, yes, and my therapist was like, oh, good, you want to jump back in. So instead of you, treating yourself like crap, well, let them do it,
Yeah.
So, it's one of those moments when I just think there's so many people that are no longer in my life. And like I said, I was just kind of thinking last night that regardless of that, the fact that there are so many people in my life that weren't healthy for me, as I've grown, they've been put aside, and that's fine. They could, be happy with other people in their life. And generally speaking, as I'm getting healthier, it doesn't feel as, I don't want to say a struggle, but lonely. I don't have that feeling of being lonely, because all I need are a few good people that actually truly love me and care for me. And as we go through this process, because it's a lifelong process. I mean, it's just, like last night, I was feeling a little sad, but I was like, I don't want to feel anything. Where's that ice cream?
Yeah.
But we all know that eventually you're going to have to.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm focused on, is just allowing myself to feel these things. Because I've always thought, well, my mind didn't allow me to feel those things. And now that I'm prepared to, I'm feeling them now.
Yeah.
I'm feeling them now.
It is important to feel that. Even though, 2.5 years ago, I would have said, no, don't want to feel it. Go away.
Yeah.
Shoo.
Right.
And I say this to my friend who is still in active therapy. I say to her, she says, oh, what do I do? They keep saying things to me. They keep telling me things. They keep sending me these, memories, and I hate it. What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
And I said, you have to feel it. I said, it sucks. It's painful.
Yes. Yes.
Agonizing, but you have to. Or what will happen is it will just get pushed away and it will come back.
Right.
And I said, next time it comes back, you're then going to have this memory, and you're going to have an alter who's angry at you because they were like, I'm sharing this with you and you're not doing anything about it. and you're pushing me away, and I'm trying to talk to you. And I said, and you don't want an angry one of those. They can be problematic when they get angry. You don't want that. You don't want that.
Right, right. No, thank you.
No, thanks. Skip it. And, when you were saying just then about family members, when I was going through the early stages of therapy, I actually have a child alter, which is very common as well. And she wanted everybody in the family to get along. She wanted everybody to be forgiving and forgetting, and everybody comes around for Christmas and this lovely idealized image. And it was very hard to explain to her that, sweetheart, we can't do that. It's not what you want is not with the family that we had. That wasn't a family. And, it's kind of like breaking this idealized image in a child's mind.
Yeah.
Because that's how she survived. Oh, but my family wasn't bad. I was bad.
Right.
And, I was the bad one. They were all lovely. And, that was very hard to go through.
Yeah. The innocence
of it. Yeah. It was devastating because as an adult, you're like, no, it was their fault. It was all their fault. And this child alter being like, but it was my fault and I did it wrong. And, we should do this and we should call our siblings and we should do, and you're just thinking,
yes,
no, we can't do that. It's not a good idea.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't want to know. We don't want to know. Everybody's happy. We love each other. Yeah.
Yeah, we're a great family. And you're thinking, no, sweetheart, we're not. Because if we were, not to be rude to you, you wouldn't be here.
Right.
You wouldn't be here.
Right. You don't know about all this protection you've been getting,
Yes, exactly.
That's why she can allow herself to be in denial because she didn't have to carry all of that.
This was the other alter's job. Jobs.
Yeah.
So she was, and that was hard because it's your child part, your child self acknowledging that actually you weren't safe, you were being abused, all of these horrific things were happening to you, and none of it was your fault.
Right. Please join us for part 2 of my discussion with Lizzie as we continue our conversation about our diagnoses and how we move forward in our lives. Thank you for joining me today on Living in Midbloom. I hope you found this episode insightful, meaningful, and maybe it's given you something to think about. I invite you to share your positive reviews or ideas on topics you would like me to touch on by leaving your comments on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Castbox, Podchaser, or Podcast Addict. We are all divine beings who just want to be seen, heard, and loved. Have a beautiful day.